Australia has entered the war in the Middle East, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announcing the government will provide military assistance to Gulf states hit by Iranian missile and drone attacks. Mr Albanese says the Australian Defence Force will deploy a Wedgetail aircraft to the United Arab Emirates to protect and defend the region. The government is also sending air-to-air missiles to United Arab Emirates to help it deter Iranian attacks. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Dziedzic joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Stephen, the Prime Minister has also confirmed this morning Australia will send military assistance to the UAE. Can you talk us through these details?
Yeah, sure, Gemma. So there are two aspects to this. The first, as you said, is the Wedgetail. This is basically a reconnaissance aircraft that is capable of pretty impressive radar array. In other words, it can keep a very close eye on what's happening in the region. So if there is, for example, an Iranian asset, like a plane or potentially a missile coming towards the UAE, then this Wedgetail would be in a very good position to pick it up, warn the UAE that it's coming, and presumably alert them to try and shoot it down. It's also probably got the capability to have a good look at what other forces might be arrayed in the region. So if there were, for example, Iranian troops gathering somewhere, then it would be able to keep an eye on them as well. And it's also used to basically coordinate a response. So if there was a need to, in very quick time, coordinate a military response to an Iranian threat, drawing on troops from a number of countries or planes from a number of countries, then the Wedgetail could do that as well. Then there's also the air-to-air missiles, which, as you mentioned, are basically, we think anyway, a variant of these missiles which are very expensive, very lethal, which can be loaded onto planes and that can be used to intercept things like incoming Iranian missiles or drones potentially launched from Iran. So this is the sum of what the PM has announced so far. The Prime Minister is calling it purely, quote, defensive in nature, stressing Australia isn't going to be sending troops into Iran itself. Let's take a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say.
The first priority of my government is, and always will be, to keep Australians safe. There are around 115,000 Australians in the Middle East, around 24,000 of those in the UAE. Helping Australians means also helping the UAE and other Gulf nations to defend themselves against what are unprovoked attacks.
And how will this plane and these missiles actually be used?
Look, I think the main purpose here is to try and do two things. One, to give the UAE a greater sense of exactly what's coming its way, as well as potentially the US and Israel. And two, to try and plug some of the gaps that have been effectively left with the successful Iranian targeting of missile defense systems. We've seen a number of US missile systems, a small number, but nonetheless, effectively hit by the Iranians. That means that the UAE, the US and Israel don't have exactly as much visibility as they might like, so they're working to fix that. This contribution from Australia, this Wedgetail, this Wedgetail plane, which is a pretty significant and pretty, a pretty advanced plane, will help plug some of those gaps to ensure that everyone has a clearer idea of exactly what might be heading towards the UAE and towards other Gulf states.
And what has the political reaction been so far, and how is it likely to play out in Canberra?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We don't yet have a formal response from the coalition. To be fair, this has only just been announced, and the coalition, we understand, is going to get briefings later this morning to try and get a clearer picture of exactly what Australia's promised. Dan Tehan, a coalition frontbencher, was on RN as it was being announced, and he said, in principle, the coalition was in support. But other members of the coalition, including one backbencher, at least I spoke to this morning, sounded a bit more cautious about it. Andrew Hastie as well, coming in, said he didn't want to make any comment on this until he had the full details. It's worth noting, these air-to-air missiles that Australia is apparently sending, they're pretty important to Australia's own defence. We bought around 200 of them last year from the United States, and a number of analysts say that that's one of the main things that Australia needs to build up for its own defence. So it will be interesting to see whether the coalition has any reservations on that front. As for the Greens, perhaps unsurprisingly, they are furiously against this. David Shoebridge, the Green senator walking into the building, said this morning that Australia was effectively being dragged into Donald Trump's illegal war. Now, of course, Australia is saying this is purely a, quote, defensive operation. operation, not an offensive one. But David Shoebridge, the point from David Shoebridge is that this distinction is basically a meaningless one. His argument is if you are helping the UAE and the US and Israel defend from Iranian missiles, then effectively what you're doing is you are freeing up US and Israeli assets, planes, other assets that will then be used to strike Iran. So he says Australia is now complicit, and he's also worried about this spiralling very quickly. He says it's clear this operation isn't wrapping up anytime soon, despite what the president said this morning, and he's worried many more Australian personnel might be dragged into this war over the coming weeks and months.